Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the Seriously Social podcast, where we bring you behind the scenes of some of the world's largest companies and explore their social media strategy. My name is Keith, and I am the CEO of Socially In, a social media agency that works with medium-sized and large businesses. We help brands with social strategy, original content production, ad management, and more. Today, we have a very special guest, Mike Delgato. Mike is the director of social media at Experian and leads the global and North American team. And if you guys don't know, Experian is a multinational consumer credit reporting company. Experian collects and aggregates information on over 1 billion people and businesses, including 235 million individual US consumers and more than 25 million US businesses. Mike, thank you so much for being on our show today. Very glad to have you.
Hey, Keith, thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely. So I just want to touch a little bit on your background, Mike, and kind of understand how you got into the realm of marketing. I'm sure you've been in marketing before social media, even was a thing. So I'd like to hear how, your background and how you got into social media.
Sure. So when I finished college, I was an English lit major. And back then, I was thinking about either going into teaching or getting into film writing or working in the cartoon industry. And around that time, I was getting married. And so I realized that the film industry was going to be kind of a harder path to go, even though I love the creative aspect of entertainment. It's also very unstable because shows end, movies end. And so I was like, I need something a little bit more permanent. I'm going to start a family, and that was important to me at that time. So I ended up starting to look for, well, what kind of jobs can an English major get? And I ended up finding this copywriter role. And I was like, oh, I can write, and copywriting looks interesting. And so I ended up like getting the job and then not even knowing what a copywriter was. And so I got the job, and then all of a sudden I'm running to the bookstore to like get books on copywriting because I didn't know what copywriters did other than they write. Anyways, that led me into a path of beginning to write web content for the company. And this is like the early days. So like anybody who's writing for the web was basically like, who's writing for the company now? So I was the copywriter. So let's get Mike to do the web writing.
Yeah.
So that led into developing blog content regularly for companies. And then around that time, social networks are starting to be used by businesses, because this is way back in the day. So this is back when MySpace was huge. And so I started launching social media accounts for the businesses I was working for. And back then it was like MySpace and a bunch of like Friendster and like smaller kind of niche
Right. I remember
social
that.
networking sites and forums that don't even exist anymore. And then a couple of years later, the company was like, hey, let's actually create a social media role. And they asked me if I'd be interested in doing it.
Uh-huh.
And this was over 17 years ago. And at the time I said no. I had no desire of being really pigeonholed into social media. And the thing is that sometimes when we're starting our careers, we don't want to get too specific. We want to be more general because we want to like learn a lot about different aspects of the field that we're in. So I really enjoyed digital marketing, and I loved all aspects of email marketing. I enjoyed learning about search engine optimization, paid search, and I just kind of like was very, very broad early in my career. And anyways, after kind of moving from content management into more niche roles like paid social and paid search, I ended up coming to Experian about 9.5 years ago to join their small business team, which is really focused on helping small businesses improve their marketing, improve their businesses. And so I was brought over as a digital marketer to kind of help with that division. And after about a year of doing that, I started working on some side projects at the company with some different teams. And then personally, when I was there was a social network internally at Experian that was just starting up. And this connected me with like people in 45 different countries. And I was like, oh, there's so much I can learn from other digital marketers.
Right.
And so I started an internal community. Anyways, fast forward, that did really well, and that got the eyes of leadership to say, hey, Mike, you built this internal community at Experian. How about doing it externally for us? So I had the official first social media role for
At
Experian, which
Experian.
was about nine and a
Wow.
half years ago.
Awesome, man. I'm interested. You mentioned that you launched some brands on MySpace. I don't recall any brands being on MySpace. Do you mind sharing who that was and what you actually did for them?
Yeah. So back then, MySpace was being used by a lot of musicians and
Right.
bands,
Yeah, I
right?
remember that.
That was kind of like how MySpace got their start. They attracted fans for different artists, and bands could play their music there. And so around that time, the companies I was working for owned colleges all around the U.S. and Canada,
Uh-huh.
and that was like our target demographic. We're like people that were into like music and maybe considering going to college, and there was some advertising starting up on MySpace, and the colleges were kind of like looking at social media. And even back then, Facebook was kind of a closed social network at the time, right? So Facebook became like a place of like, oh, college students are on social media, and this would be a good place to reach people. So back then, there was a school that I worked for called Wyotech, which is a automotive school that
Gotcha.
helped train people that were interested in getting into um, either fixing planes or fixing cars and getting certified as mechanics.
Mhm.
So I started a Wildtech MySpace page back in the day. That was just one. There was also some other niche automotive forums and social media, social networking sites that were actually better fit for the brand. But MySpace was an easy place to develop content and also rank really well on Google, because when you typed in Wyotech, the MySpace page would like rank in the top 10.
Yeah, I remember when there was a time when there were a lot of social network platforms popping up that were very niche specific. And now what's happening is, Facebook, LinkedIn, they're all kind of starting their own groups. I don't know if you recall, but Facebook actually ran a Super Bowl commercial around Facebook groups. So very, very interesting stuff. So how is the internal community at Experian doing? Is that still going strong? Is that growing? What's that? Just would like to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, it really ballooned. So over the years, and as more and more people started to use social media for business, because originally social media was very much a personal place, especially back in the day. It was a place for friends to connect, especially if you were looking to connect with former classmates. That was kind of a place to find them and also connect with family and friends. And social media in the beginning was very much a personal place.
Right.
But as businesses started to enter in, and especially when things like LinkedIn started up, it began places where, oh, we can actually have business conversations. And of course, like you mentioned, Facebook groups. Like when I go into Facebook and I type in like artificial intelligence or business intelligence, I can find tons
Tons of
of
stuff. Yeah.
fantastic discussions around specific business topics that I'm interested in. And so at Experian, like our internal social networks have just been booming. Like more and more people have been
Yeah.
more comfortable like over the years, and so it's really cool to see the thriving activity happening internally for
What do
Experian.
you guys use? Do you use Workplace, Facebook Workplace, or something else for your internal network?
Yeah, I can't share with you the tool, but it's a very
Okay.
popular tool that's out there for. I mean, there's lots of different enterprise tools that you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
use.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know you have your own podcast produced by Experian. Do you mind talking about that a little bit and what they're about?
Oh, sure. So over the years, I've created a couple different podcasts for Experian, and the two that I run right now, one is called DataTalk, and
Mhm.
that one is based on a live stream show that we do on Facebook, and was originally on YouTube live. But basically, that show is really geared to help people understand a little bit about data scientists, what they do, um, how they're leveraging data in their businesses to help consumers and also help businesses make better decisions. And Data Talk's really a conversation with getting to know different data scientists, who they are, what type of work they're doing, their passions and their interests. And it's really kind of a human conversation. And then we
Gotcha.
do get into some data techie topics. And then the other podcast is called Level Up Leadership. And that one's based around getting to know the leaders at Experian and what drives them, what motivates them, how they're leading their teams. And it's almost like a mentorship class.
Mm,
Basically, every episode is hearing from a different leader for about an hour, and they're sharing their leadership journey, their experiences,
I love
things
that.
that they've learned along the way. And so those are two shows that I work on right now.
Awesome. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, I'm interested in what your day to day at Experian looks like because you guys are a multinational company, very large organization. Your social channels are also have a large audience. I'm interested in, are you in the day to day? Do you have a team that you work with? Maybe if you can just touch a little bit about what your day to day looks like.
Yeah, so it's a pretty as you can imagine, we're in over 40 countries, so we have marketers and teams all over the world, which makes life really exciting. Like I get to chat with people all over the world, and we're
Yeah,
working on various projects. And I wish I could tell you that there's like a day that's the same. It
sure.
really changes from day to day, but I think like part of the role of somebody who leads social for a global organization, part of it is the listening aspect, right? We need to spend time listening to our consumers, listening to what are the important trends and topics that our leaders need to know about. Um, we need to do reporting on certain trends and topics from depending on what's coming up. And especially right now during COVID-19, like there are so many things that we are paying attention to and making sure that our content is resonating with our audiences. Because as you know, working in social media, it's all about developing helpful content for our target audiences. And so that means like we have to be really good listeners. And so listening and social listening tools is a key part of our jobs to make sure that we are not being tone deaf on social,
Right.
that when different issues come up, what is Experian's position on that issue? Is it something that Experian needs to address? How do we address it? What
Mhm.
sort of content should we be creating around that message? Is it video? Is it an animated GIF? Is it a image? Um, is it a live stream? And then which channels are we using? Are we using all the channels? Are we focusing on one or two channels? Um, so listening is a big part of anybody who's on social media. They know that
Yeah.
that's a big part of the job. And I think right now what is been very difficult about listening is that the content right now around COVID-19, the Black Lives Matter movement, the
Right.
various protests that are happening, having to um, just see the police brutality, see what happened to George Floyd and countless other marginalized community members being killed.
Mhm.
What's been really hard about social listening has been the amount of violence and the amount of pain that right now is happening on social.
Mhm.
And right now, the beautiful part is there's a positive movement. There's a positive movement for change, a positive drive for we need to be more inclusive. How can we improve our relationships with our Black communities, with our
Mhm.
marginalized communities? How can we get better educated? Like, so there's a lot of positive
For sure.
conversation, right? So that's beautiful. The hard thing is that there has been obviously so much violence and so much hurtful things that have gone on,
Right.
not only on video, but also from people who are maybe not inclusive, people who are very racist.
Mhm.
And um, and so when you're social listening, and if you're part of that community that's been hurt, and not only is the Black community been uh, talked about terribly online, and there's been so much racism, but also there has been a lot of xenophobia towards our Asian communities. And that started early on during when
Right.
COVID first started. People were blaming Asian people for the flu. And um, and so I'm saying all that because when it comes to social listening, which is an important part of our job as social media leaders, what we have to be careful about is that sometimes what you're listening to can be traumatic.
Mhm.
And leaders need to be aware of when you're assigning social listening tasks to your teams, you need to be aware of who you're asking to do that task, and is that person comfortable
Right.
looking at that content to do reporting?
Right. Right.
Because right, because listening and watching the video content, paying attention to the hateful posts around certain communities, can be very traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my message, is like you have to be very, very careful during times of crisis about social listening. Social listening is super important during times of crisis, but it's also a time when we need to take a step back and realize, okay, when I assign this task, is there going to be any sort of trauma that could be raised in that individual who's listening in?
Absolutely.
And if there is, we should not obviously be handing that project to that person. Like someone else
I
needs to be
agree.
looking at it.
I agree. No, that's some great advice, and I think that's something every leader should consider, especially if they even if they have a small social media team, considering the fact that they are going to be social listening, and being cognizant of what's actually happening. So I have a couple of questions about what you said. Going back to your early statement about being in 40 plus different countries. Do you guys think of the different languages? Do you guys translate your content in all of those different languages? And how are your profiles set up? Is it Experian US, or how is it set up?
Yeah, so global social is interesting because every company does it a little bit differently.
Mhm.
And the way we kind of structure our accounts is we have kind of um, country accounts. So there's like Experian US accounts and Experian UK accounts and Experian Brazil accounts. And then within those country accounts, we also have business units.
Mhm.
So based around the specific target audiences that we're trying to reach. So for
Mhm.
example, in the US, we'll have Experian US health accounts,
Got
automotive accounts, banking accounts, right? So we kind of break it down at that kind of topic level based on audience, because that
it.
those particular channels are putting out content for those specific audiences. So whereas like the US account can definitely share out things around what we're doing in the automotive markets or the banking markets, like that's going to be more general. It may
Mhm.
not be as engaged as much as those more niche accounts that are focused, right, just on those specific core areas. And so, and along with that, we're also taking into account languages. Now, what's beautiful about social networks like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, is that if the post goes out in English or Spanish, depending on where you are in the world, you can
Mhm.
automatically have it translated to your region. So
Mhm.
that's the nice thing about these social networks, is that language generally isn't an issue because the translation tool is available right there within the social media account.
Right.
Um, but language is a really important area that anybody who's working on the global side needs to be thinking about, because also as you're generating social media accounts, especially like in Brazil, where people are comfortable speaking Portuguese and English back and forth, sometimes that means that our content will be a mixture. Same with here in the US. Sometimes we've actually had discussions around having some Spanish accounts where it would be Spanglish, where we get a chance to talk um, like we would at home, where it's a mixture of Spanish and English, and that's totally acceptable. So
Right.
based on the region we're in, the comfort level of that community, it could be a blending of a language, it could be one or the other, or it could be a mixture. And if you look at our Experian LinkedIn page, you'll see that it's really a mixture. Depending on
Gotcha.
who we're targeting, we'll use specific languages.
Gotcha. Okay. And I'm glad that you bring up that point that the translation tools are actually built right into the social channels. Because we do get a lot of prospects asking, "Hey, do you guys translate?" And obviously, we can translate, but I kind of refer back to the fact that the translation is built into whatever language you've selected in your profile. Okay, awesome. So, what would you say some of the overall goals leadership asks of your social media team are? Is it lead generation? Is it brand awareness? Is it education? I know you said, they asked you early on to help build an external community. Maybe if you can touch a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I think anybody who walks into a social media role, depending on the business unit you go into and kind of the function you're being asked to do,
Right.
sometimes it could be marketing. And I've definitely been in more marketing driven roles where the job is really leads and sales around case studies or webinars, things like that, or even selling products. And I've done a lot of that on social. My current job right now is more around building community and helping improve reputation and also expand our credit education efforts. You mentioned that we're a credit bureau. And so part of our work is how do we help educate people around really important money topics and credit topics so that everyone can be financially healthy. And so like, how do we develop that type of content and use social media to do that? So I think the big overarching goal, whether you're a marketer or whether you're there as a community builder, the ultimate goal is to provide help, to provide meaningful content that people want to go to your channel because they know that you're going to have something there that's going to be useful to them. So that's got to be number one. It's got to be, how are you creating useful content that will drive people back to want to see your YouTube channel or want to see what you're tweeting next? Like, that has to be your ultimate goal, because if you're not doing that, your marketing messages are really, really going to be ignored. And sometimes I see that in certain businesses where you go to their Twitter account or their Instagram account and it's all sales. Like, they're constantly promoting something.
$19.99 today only.
Yeah, and that could be so like pretty soon you just block it out. Like, you don't want to see the marketing messages anymore.
I'm with you on that. So I'm interested in how your team structure is. So your different business units that you have, do you have separate social media managers for each different business unit?
Yeah, so each of our business units will have different people who are leading social. So, and sometimes their role won't be titled social media manager. Their role could be digital marketer, but under that umbrella, they're also handling social media.
Got it.
So there are lots of people that are doing social for Experian. They don't necessarily have the title of social media manager. It could be a comms title or a marketer title. So we have those types of roles all over the world, people handling social. And then I think as companies grow and as they get bigger, they're able to have more niche roles, like people that are focused on social listening, or people that are focused just on paid social, things like that.
Got it. So, going the current state of the world with all the protests, the Black Lives Matter movement, COVID, has Experian taken a stance on any of those topics? So obviously you guys probably made a statement around COVID. I know some major corporations have taken a ban on Facebook ads for a month long. I'm interested in hearing what you guys may have done, or if anything.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I've been really proud of the Experian leadership because they acted so quickly to come out both internally with heartfelt messages from our leaders around their feelings towards the Black Lives Matter movement. And like I said, we have an internal social media network at Experian where people are just sharing from their heart how they're feeling. And so I was really very impressed with how quickly leadership came out to share their support of the Black Lives Matter movement, both internally and as well as externally on our global news blog. And so on the social media side, like, we put out that messages across LinkedIn, across Facebook, Twitter, even did a YouTube and even a DataTalk episode around the Black Lives Matter movement, and also things that we were doing going forward. So I think a big part of what brands were struggling with was they didn't want to just say, yes, we stand with the Black community during this time. Like, that wasn't enough. Like, it's not enough just to say that, because of course you shouldn't be racist. That's like a human thing, of course. But what are you doing about this specific situation? What are you doing specifically to help the Black community? So our leadership took time to think about, like, what are some things we can actively do and also say that we're doing, aside from just sharing our support. But what are things we're actively going to be doing? And so, just to give you an example, on DataTalk, I talked about how, like, you know what, we've never really talked about racism in AI. That was never really a topic that we covered in the last 2 years of DataTalk. And we've talked about gender in AI. We talked about issues around it. We've never specifically addressed racism and racial bias in AI, at least not too much. We did have a conversation here and there, but it wasn't really a focus. But after George Floyd was killed, and as we started to watch and see the Black Lives Matter movement develop, I started to realize and check in on myself, like, what am I doing to help? How am I getting educated on these issues? And so I talked about in the DataTalk podcast, like, my role, I'm going to be using DataTalk to start to address some of these issues and how marginalized communities have been hurt by AI. So that was something I personally was doing. And I think everybody at Experian has been doing a check-in. Like, what are we individually doing? And then what are we as an organization doing?
Right.
Aside from donations, aside from doing those monetary acts, but like things within our organization, how are we improving diversity and inclusion? Obviously, that's a mission statement for most companies. If you go to, most company websites, they'll always say that, yes, we promote diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
It seems like a standard thing that people say, but the bigger question is like, well, what does that actually mean? Like, how are you actually doing that? How are you making sure that you are helping to raise up this next generation of leaders in your organization to promote more diversity? How are you mentoring certain community groups?
Absolutely.
How are you measuring diversity and inclusion at your company? Like, these are all super important questions that, of course, we've been thinking about, but I think it's even magnified now. And so, in Experian, we want to attract the best talent. So that means, like, when someone comes into Experian, we should be expecting that question: what did you do around Black Lives Matter? Right? Because somebody who has empathy and compassion, they want to work at a company who has similar empathy and compassion. So that's super important. And I was really, really proud to see just the quick response, the blog posts, the personal notes, and just seeing people come together. And also, like I said, a big part of it is like checking in, like, on ourselves, like, what are we doing? So
I love that.
That's been a big part of this too.
That's awesome. Okay, so switching gears here, and last question. I want to talk about kind of the hottest topic right now, which is TikTok. So 2 questions for you. One, has Experian thought about TikTok and what a TikTok marketing strategy would look like? And then I want to get your thoughts on the bans that are happening, or at least the conversation of the bans that are happening in the US, and India has already banned TikTok. So those 2 questions, and we'll end it there.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so we have been we have used in the past Snapchat for credit education, and we spent 2 years.
Awesome.
Yeah, we spent 2 years doing, and I did a lot of Snapchat video clips, trying to make credit education fun and silly, so that it appeals to our younger generations. Like, my kids are my tests. Like, I'll have them watch the video and see if they laugh or they think they're learning something from it. So I think it's always great to be able to test out new platforms. And if your target audience is there and you want to build brand awareness, and for example, right now, TikTok is approaching universities and colleges, wanting them to start to use TikTok as a platform to educate kids and get them thinking about college. Yeah. So it's a very interesting play, but it's very similar to like Facebook, because Facebook really started with the college market.
Right.
So I think that TikTok can be used as an educational vehicle similar to Snapchat. I think also people have to just realize, like, it takes time to build any sort of community, and that if your content is not like silly and fun like the TikTok audience wants, like, your content's probably not going to be as engaging. Not to say that you can't use it for education, but you got to really be thinking about, like, how can I use this fun place that people are going to relax, to actually mix in a little bit of, like, is TikTok the right place for us? It may not be. I don't think that every brand needs to be jumping into TikTok. It could just make you look really, really bad and cheesy if you're if you're trying to go in there and do something that is not appropriate for your brand. So I think you have to be very, very thoughtful about it. So like I said, we did Snapchat for 2 years. Once Instagram launched their stories, it just pulled our audience away from Snapchat. And so we saw just a drastic decline. So as we were like really excited about building our community, and like 2 years into Snapchat, we were like really happy. We were getting so much
Yeah.
great engagement and snapbacks, and it was awesome. And then once Instagram launched their stories, which was basically Snap stories, like it hurt Snapchat a lot. And we
And then the
saw our community.
Kardashian
Yeah.
tweeted out death of a Snapchat. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, 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 exactly. So I saw what happened there. I saw our community was just less and less on Snapchat and moving over to Instagram. So we still have a Snapchat account, but we really haven't been active just because
Gotcha.
the time it takes to produce a story, as you know, can be very time consuming as you are writing out the script,
Yep.
figuring out the clip that you want to do. From a brand perspective, it takes time, and the return on investment on that time wasn't good anymore, unfortunately. Now, I know Snapchat's been bouncing back in different places around the world, which is great. So maybe Snapchat's something we'll look at to do in the future again. But for now, we haven't seen the ROI, so we kind of paused on
Understood.
that for now. And as far as TikTok, I kind of see TikTok as something similar in the sense of like, can you make fun, creative content for the TikTok audience, which is even younger, right? Even younger than Snapchat. And so I think every brand needs to figure that out.
Sure.
And but I'm always for testing things. And if you can do something that's going to be fun and it fits with your brand, and you're able to use it as a way to educate and also entertain, and you can find that balance, like that's awesome. But it
Yeah.
does take a lot of time, and the trouble with running those tests is because you spend so much time developing the content and the strategy behind it, and then sometimes what happens is you run that campaign for 2 weeks to a month, and you're not getting the views
Right.
that you thought. And
Hmm.
part of that's because, like, as you know, when you start any new community, like, you have no fan base. So like, you put out a video, you're not going to get hardly any views because you have no one
Distribution is
following you.
key.
Yeah, so that's the bummer part. Is some people quit too early. You
Hmm.
quit too early because, like, oh, I'm not getting the results I wanted. Well, of course not. You have no fan base. Like,
Yeah.
it takes time to sit there and kind of develop a community. So it has to be very thoughtful, has to be long term. And as far as the various bans that are happening around the world, that's something that every global brand needs to be thinking about. Because if
Absolutely.
you're going to be launching a a social media profile in a network that is being banned in certain countries, how will that be perceived to be running it in different countries but not in that country? What sort of kickback will you get, or reactions will you get from the community, like going, oh, why aren't you doing any sort of posts, in India or in
Right.
different parts of the world where it's being banned? So you need to have messaging in place about what your strategy is
Yeah.
and why you're not participating in that country.
No, that makes sense. Well, Mike, thank you so much. This was very helpful. I'm sure our listeners got a lot of good advice from this. And like I said, I can't thank you enough